www.offthecorner.net. I'm Rallo, and you are watching the Fact Project. The FACT, of course, is an acronym that stands for Fundamental African Centered Thought. The goal here on the Fact Project is to convey some facts and some information to members of our community. I want to give a big shout out to the DJ Tiger. That's my brother. He always jumps through hoops to make the magic happen. And he's always doing at least two things at once. Not sure how he does that. But salute to DJ Tiger. Today's knowledge of self is Scholar Warrior. I'm going to do a little bit more on this at some point in the future. Knowledge of self is the daily knowledge of self is different concepts or principles applied to each day of the month to kind of keep us grounded in our culture. And the culture of hip hop and rap music is something that, well, I should say commercial rap is something that people are getting tired of. I did a whole piece on this called Rap Fatigue, or What is Rap Fatigue. And so go back and definitely check out What is Rap Fatigue. But people are definitely getting tired of commercial rap and they want something different. And so if we're going to have something different, we need to really hone in on culture. What is culture? And how do we exemplify and manifest our culture so that it's beneficial to us? So today's knowledge of self is Scholar Warrior. Scholar Warriors are conscious people of African heritage that resist the psychological warfare that has been waged against them by Europeans. That's key. Psychological warfare. A lot of people are not understanding that we are at war. The great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said, racism is war on Black people. Many of us don't understand that, and many of us don't understand about the psychological warfare that has been waged against us, which is what commercial rap music is. It basically does not promote positive relationships among us as a people. It promotes materialism, misogyny, violence, and even murder of other people of your own race, your own ethnic group. The only music in the world that does that. And Black people, unfortunately, are the only people in the world that would make music that demeans them and promotes violence among the group. But either way, Scholar Warriors are conscious people of African heritage that resist the psychological warfare that has been waged against them. Scholar Warriors are intellectual maroons that commit acts of intellectual disobedience against European-centered disinformation. Now, what are intellectual maroons? Well, during the enslavement process, there were three types of enslaved Africans. You had the house enslaved African, those Africans that worked in the field. And then you had those people that were not too keen on the idea of enslavement, and they would try to escape the plantation. Those people that escaped the plantation were referred to as maroons. Maroons could mean two things. It could mean wild one, or it could mean to abandon someone. So if you abandon someone on an island and you just left them, that's called you maroon them on an island. So maroon means to be rebellious or to be abandoned. And so when it says that we need to become intellectual maroons, means we need to abandon the status quo, that European frame of reference that we've been taught by our oppressor, if we're going to be free. The great Dr. Maulana Karenga says, in order to free yourself, you must first be yourself. And in order for us to be ourselves, we have to practice and manifest our own culture. Now, some of the greatest scholar warriors include the great Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen, the great Dr. John Henry Clark, the great Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Of course, I mentioned the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. You have any number of other people who were scholar warriors, the great Malcolm X, Neely Fuller Jr., et cetera, et cetera. Is any number of people that can be considered scholar warriors. Now, the subject is culture. And we want to talk about culture and be clear about what culture is and what it should be. This way we can practice the culture. Important to practice the culture. Culture is defined any number of ways, and it means different things to different people. So, for example, I mentioned the 5% nation of gods and earths. Part of their culture is how they educate the group. 120 lessons. It's part of the culture, right? So culture is how a group educates itself. Culture is also what a group does and how they do it, right? The way they do it. Culture is any number of things, and I had it, I misplaced it. I'm trying to get the definition of culture. Forgive me, I'm doing this on the fly. This is not how we normally do the show, but we got a different setup going, so we're doing things a little bit differently. So culture is the thought and practice of a people. Culture is the basis of thought and behavior. Now, if the rap music is negative and that's all you're listening to every day, all day, your thought and behavior is going to be negative because the thing that's causing that negative behavior is the media and the information you're taking in. So I'll start that again. Culture is the thought and practice of a people. It is the basis of thought and behavior. Culture is vital for human understanding. That's important and that's key. Culture is important for human understanding, social cohesion, and individual identity. Culture should promote solidarity among the group, right? Social cohesion. Commercial rap music is not promoting social cohesion, it's promoting confusion and it's promoting violence and misogyny against women and materialism, promoting confusion. I mentioned the great Neely Fuller Jr. The great Neely Fuller Jr. said, the chief principle in the system of structural racism is confusion. If a person is confused, they're not going to know what to do. So confusion is key. So culture is vital for human understanding, social cohesion, and individual identity, as well as shared identity. Now, when you're part of a group and that group shares a particular culture, that helps to bond, right, and unify the group. It's important for individual identity too, because when you're away from the group, whatever you learn in your culture is how you make decisions, is how you move, is how you go about the world, right? It provides a framework for shared values, perspectives, and behaviors, and can unite groups as well as shape perspectives of the world. These are all things culture does. And this is just one explanation of what culture is. This is not the end all and the be all, because there's any number of ways to explain what culture is. It says when you practice another people's culture, you undermine your integrity. I'm going to stop there. I think that's important. As people of African heritage, we have been forced to practice another people's culture. So, for example, European-centered Christianity is another people's culture. Practicing and engaging in European religion is practicing another people's culture. When you practice another people's culture, you undermine your integrity as an individual. So then the question becomes, what is your culture? You become what Dr. Wade Nobles, noted African-centered psychologist, said, you become conceptually incarcerated, which means you become psychologically and mentally incarcerated into European ideas and European concepts. So you're going about the world trying to function as if you're a European. That's like trying to put a round block in a square hole. We know the IQ test, right? And that's education in America. It's trying to put black children, a round block, hypothetically speaking, in a square hole. The round block does not go in a square hole. You can, however, force the round block to go into the square hole, but you can't do that without causing damage to the round block. That's us as people of African heritage, being socialized by European-centered culture, not understanding our own culture. When you practice another people's culture, you undermine your integrity. If you don't understand your culture and your ancestors, you won't understand yourself. And this is where knowledge of self becomes important. You have to know your ancestral culture in order for you to really understand the knowledge of yourself. And if you study education and the concept of educating Black children, research shows that Black children academically do better when you teach them racial pride. You're not being taught racial pride if you're only being overexposed to another people's culture and you're getting an orientation into someone else's culture. That's not racial pride. And so other people are learning racial pride. We see January 6th. Those people were very emboldened. Why? They learned racial pride through the European-centered educational system that they went through. right? It gave them this hubris to go about doing whatever it is they did. When you practice another people's culture, repeating, you undermine your integrity. If you don't understand your culture and your ancestors, you won't understand yourself. And this is something Neely Fuller Jr. talks about. If you don't understand the system of structural racism, everything else is going to confuse you. You won't even understand yourself. Culture for people of African heritage should be African centered. Some aspects of African culture include emphasis on community and family, deep respect for elders, respect for ancestors, cooperation, sharing and supporting each other, a focus on the well-being of the group over individual needs. That's key. A focus on the well-being of the group over individual needs. I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. A focus on, or rather an emphasis on the well-being of children, a connection to nature, being self-sufficient, music, right? Rap music or any music, but the music of the culture, dance, cultural visual art, and teaching morality through storytelling and proverbs. Now, those are some of the things, and forgive me for a minute because I got to grab something. Those are some of the aspects of African culture. Now, the great Dr. Amos Wilson said, if you practice a culture, whatever culture you practice, and Dr. Amos Wilson, another noted African-centered psychologist, psychologists have done the research, they got the formal education, they have the analysis. The great Dr. Amos Wilson said, a culture, whatever culture you practice, should solve problems and meet the needs of a people. Rap music, the way it is being promoted on commercial radio, does not solve problems. That helps to create problems. So that's not our culture per se, because our culture was never this violent thing that you would engage in violence against members of your own group. And so Dr. Amos Wilson said, culture, whatever culture you are involved with, should be able to solve problems and meet the needs of a people. I see a lot of people involved in culture. They're very adamant about promoting things that don't solve problems. If anything, they create more problems. And so this idea of solving problems, I'm going to come back to that because the question becomes, what is the greatest problem we're faced with as a people? That's the problem we need to solve. And our culture should be an integral part of solving that problem. So if you're in the chat, I want you to give me your assessment. What is the greatest problem we're faced with? And we'll see what we get in the chat. What is the greatest problem we're faced with as a people? That's the thing that we need to solve, right? We need to solve that problem. I'm going to give people a chance to get in the chat and tell me what they think the greatest problem we're faced with is and how our culture could help to solve that problem. So so before I do this, aspects of African culture is what I'm about to do. When European anthropologists, and anthropologists are people that study culture, they study people, they study human behavior, etc. When white European anthropologists first started going into the interior of Africa and they started to study the people, they noticed that the people had an exceptional amount of group loyalty, group solidarity, and they practiced collectivism. That's different from what the European is used to because European culture is based on individualism and individuality. And I've heard psychologists say that that goes back to the Neanderthal days in Europe when food doesn't really grow in abundance. And if you got food, you didn't share that because you didn't know when you were going to eat again. Africa, on the other hand, completely different climate, everything grows. This is something psychologists refer to as psychoclimatology. It's the impact that the climate that you're in has on who you become psychologically, right? So this idea of group solidarity, group loyalty, and collectivism, this is not something you see coming out of European culture. So when they went to the interior of Africa and they saw African people engaged in group solidarity, group loyalty, and practicing this collectivism, it kind of struck them as strange because that's not something that comes out of their culture. It's a foreign concept to them. So with the rap music being what it is, violent, and it promotes division among us, and it promotes a lot of the violence we see in the street. Violence, intergroup violence among us as a people is off the chain. And I say intergroup violence because any group of people can have intergroup violence. People make this expression black on black violence. We never say Chinese on Chinese or East Indian on East Indian violence, but they create an expression called black on black violence. I don't use that. I say intergroup violence. Any group of people can have intergroup violence. But either way, having said that, with the amount of intergroup violence that we have among us as a race, can't we use some group solidarity, group loyalty, and collectivism, right? Going back to our African culture, isn't that something we can use right now? Another thing that is a standout in African culture is the importance of relationships. In the European tradition, the highest ideal is the thing. And the thing could be money, could be material possessions, it could be colonizing another people's country, it could be any number of things. Uh, it could be it could be any number of things, but the thing is the most important thing to them, or the acquisition of the thing, meaning they'll go above and beyond to get the thing, whatever the thing is, right? In African culture, the highest ideal is relationships, one to another, right? Agreeable relationship. Isn't that something we could use now? You know, the culture of commercial rap music does not promote agreeable relationships at all. So relationships, mutual respect, social cohesion, and social harmony. These are things that come out of African culture. Aren't those things that we could use now? Tell me in the chat if you think those are things that we could use now as it relates to popular culture in, I don't know, commercial rap, however you want to term that. Um, Let me know what you think in the chat. Either way, here's another one. I think this is important. A deep respect for elders. This is something that comes out of African culture. A deep respect for elders. Now, I see that as something that we could use now. I heard a story. It was coming out of Washington, D.C. It was an elder, a sister. She's an elder. And she was on the bus. And she was getting off of the bus. And I guess she wasn't moving fast enough for the sisters that were behind her. They were maybe teens or early 20s. They began to curse the elder and tell her to get out the way and call her old and etc. They were very disrespectful to the elder. Elders are like a walk-in library, right? These are people that we can learn from and get information from. Many of us have parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents that are old or getting older. We don't want anyone disrespecting the elders in our family, so we shouldn't be disrespectful to other elders. So, respect for elders, isn't that something we can use right now? These are aspects of African culture. Again, if we can get back to our culture as a people, we can solve our problems. One of the standouts in African culture is a deep respect for ancestors. Now, if it weren't for our ancestors, there would be no us. So I think it's basic common sense to have a respect for ancestors. I want to give a shout out to Hassan Burton, who's in the chat. Definitely a shout out to Henry Cedillo, who's always in the check-in. That's Fact Family. Those people are always in the check-in. As Kenny Mack says, hip hop is not going nowhere. People. Well, I'm not saying hip hop should go somewhere. I'm just saying it needs to get back to that kind of conscious stage that we were in. Hassan Burton says self-love, love for yourself, and that's an aspect of African culture that I'm going to come to in a minute. Love for yourself is absolutely important. Henry Cedillo said Facebook can be positive for people who move in life in a conscious way, but it definitely has a bunch of negative activity, just like music, movies, and other subjects. Depends on the individual. Social media is like fire. You know, it can be used for good, it can be used to cook food and warm a baby, or it can be used to burn a house down, right? So social media is incumbent on how you use it. So respect to Henry Cedillo to for that comment. Hassan Burton says a call to counsel. Yes, because if you have elders, now we just talked about the elders. If you have elders and you have a community, elders are those people that you go to for counsel, right? For guidance and advice, etc. So that respect for elders is absolutely important. Um, I say a deep respect for ancestors. I said that. We must be mindful of respecting our ancestors because, after all, without them, there would be no us, right? Emphasis on family. This is something that we've gotten away from. In African culture, the family unit is very important. The first, I guess, I, I don't want to say organization, but the first group of people that you become familiar with is your family. And family shapes who you become intellectually, socially, politically, etc. So family is definitely important, right? That emphasis on family is definitely important. In America, the black family has been deliberately broken up. At some point, they dropped off heroin in the black community, late 60s maybe. Because if you go back and you study statistics, statistically, I don't know, from 1865 maybe to the 1960s, the black family was intact, and black homeowners were more inclined to pay their mortgage and pay it on time as opposed to their white counterparts. And the family was always the nucleus, right, of everything. And so that idea of family becomes important. The system of structural racism dropped off heroin in the black community, late 60s, or maybe even before that, because we know of a lot of jazz musicians that are legends that were mixed up in heroin use, right? And so that the idea of using drugs as biological warfare against us that existed before the 1950s. I would have to do the research on that, but they dropped off heroin in the black community, right? That caused damage, and then subsequent to that, Vietnam War begins, and the system begins to draft a lot of people into the war. So that took black men out of the home, right? And not only that, if you wanted some kind of public assistance, because the system of structural racism wouldn't give you a job or wouldn't give you housing in certain areas, etc., a lot of people would try to seek social services. The system said you can't have a man in the house if you want to receive assistance. Okay, so this is continuing to take black men out of the home. In the 1980s, we know about the crack epidemic. Crack was dropped off in the black community, and that became another reason for black men to be out of the home, to either selling crack or using it or getting incarcerated because of crack possession, whether it's using or selling. So that's taken black men out of the home. And so they deliberately broke up the black family. When I say they, I'm talking about the system of structural racism. The great Dr. John Henry Clark said that enslavement was not only a war on African culture, but it was also a war on the black family. And I said in my book, the Fact Book, that the disintegration of the black community begins with the disintegration of the black family. I said the black community is in disarray because the black family is in disarray. And so an emphasis on family, another aspect of African culture that we could use and need to focus on and get back to, as opposed to practicing European culture where I seen children curse the parents out. It's crazy. Anyway, uh, another aspect of African culture that's very important that we need to get back to is a focus on the well-being of children. We hear a lot about R. Kelly or Jeffrey Epstein and some of these other people that are taking advantage of children. Africa Bambaataa, right? Put his name in it. We hear these stories about people taking advantage of children. So focus on the well-being of the children. That's key because the children are the future of the group. In fact, among the Maasi people of Kenya, they don't greet each other by saying, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on?" They greet each other by saying, "Are the children well?" So this emphasis and focus on the well-being of the children, very important to African culture. We must be mindful of taking care of and looking after the children. Hassan says, "Bro, thank you. Thank you, brother Hassan Burton, for always checking in and chiming in and giving me positive feedback." Henry Sedillo said, "Definitely bring back conscious music and conscious hip hop." I shade to that. We need conscious hip hop. In fact, it was Public Enemy and conscious hip hop that awakened my consciousness and got me to the point where I'm here on the Fact Project now, doing a podcast talking about consciousness in the music. Very important. So consciousness in the music, and music is something we're going to come to as it relates to aspects of African culture. Another aspect of African culture that we've gotten away from, and this is something we overlook every day: a respect for nature and eco-friendly living. Now we can go back to our ancient African past. Could be ancient Kemet, could be ancient Kush, it could be the Aksum Empire, it could be any number of different empires in Africa. There was no such thing as planned obsolescence. Now, what does that mean? Planned obsolescence is you get a bag of chips, right? You eat the chips, the bag itself becomes obsolete. You throw the bag in the garbage. Or you eat a candy bar, or you eat any food that comes in a plastic wrapping. It's obsolete once you eat the thing that comes in the plastic wrapping. Or you can buy a product. You could buy air conditioner. You could buy whatever. Whatever you buy, most times is packaged with plastic. Once you get that item, the plastic it was packaged with becomes obsolete. You toss it. Plastic is not biodegradable. So now that goes into the earth. Plastic is like it's choking the earth. It's in landfills. It's in the ocean. There's probably the size of Texas, like the amount of bottles that are floating around in the ocean. Plastic bottles. It doesn't biodegrade. So it's definitely a threat and a detriment to the ecology of the planet. And so this idea of a respect for nature, there was no planned obsolescence in African culture because there was no prepackaged processed food. There was no items coming in plastic that you buy and everything is coming in plastic. There was no planned obsolescence. And so a respect for nature and eco-friendly living, that's part of the culture. Now, isn't that something we could use now, right? Um, Taking care of the environment. Um, I think if we are grown adults, we should be keepers of the planet. It's the indigenous people, they say we don't take care of the planet for our children. We borrow it from our grandchildren, meaning you have to take care of your environment because people that are going to descend you have to inherit that environment and live in that environment. Here is another aspect of African culture that's very important: gratitude. In ancient Kemet, you saw a lot of what they call dua, the different aspects of nature. So they were grateful for the sun, and they conveyed that in the artwork. They were grateful for water. They were grateful for the air. They were grateful for, all these different aspects of nature, and they conveyed that in the artwork. So gratitude is always a big part of African culture. And if you study psychology, the psychologists now go into the importance of gratitude and what that does to your brain. Could release endorphins, it could release dopamine, as opposed to releasing cortisol, which is the fight or flight hormone, which is what people are getting probably when they're listening to this disagreeable rap music that's got that booming 808 on the bottom throughout the whole track. That low resonance, that's the sort of sound you hear in horror movies when the scene is getting intense and they want to impact you psychologically with that scene in the movie. They use these low rumbling noises. That's the same sounds you hear now in the commercial rap music. It's releasing endorphins. It's releasing fight or flight hormones, right? Where you either it's fight, flight, or freeze. You're either gonna fight, you're gonna run, or you're gonna freeze. Either way, it releases that cortisol. Uh, an over release of cortisol all the time, ongoing, can cause neurological damage to your nervous system, and it's very bad for your brain. Gratitude, on the other hand, is very good for your brain. And so we don't hear a lot of ideas and concepts in the music where it's showing gratitude. I can recall, and those of you who are old enough to remember will know, the Jungle Brothers on their second album, Done by the Forces of Nature, they did a song called Black Woman, where they're conveying and expressing gratitude for Black women. And the first human on the planet was a Black woman, according to all the archaeologists, anthropologists, paleontologists, geneticists, paleogeneticists, and biologists. First human on the planet was a Black woman. So inherently, we should have this respect for Black women, right? So Jungle Brothers did this record called Black Woman, and it was giving gratitude to Black women. Taking that same concept, not too long after that, Heavy D did a record called Black Coffee, where he's also bigging up Black women and putting them on a pedestal. Shout out to Heavy D, man. We miss Heavy D. Heavy D was good rap. Heavy D was rap you could play in the car with your parents, your grandmother could be in the car and listen to Heavy D. Um, Let me see what we got in the chat. It says the sixth drip says rap has been dead. It's all auto-tune clowns. who can shake their bottom, I'll say it like that, to the most simps. Okay, so it says rap has been dead. I disagree. I think commercial rap is dead. I still listen to underground boom bap. I don't listen to trap. I don't listen to drill. It doesn't appeal to me, right? So I still listen to a lot of boom bap. If you have, I don't want to promote any corporations that are not underwriting the DJ Tiger channel, but if you have the TuneIn app and you have some of these other apps, you can hear tons of underground rap music with good production that will resonate with you. That's, it's musical. It's not this booming 808 throughout the whole track, different tempos. And that's another thing in the rap music. The tempo is always around maybe 70, 73 beats per minute. That puts your brain in alpha mode. When your brain is put into alpha mode, according to the experts, not according to me, when your brain is put into alpha mode, that makes you more open to suggestions. So they give you this booming low resonance on the bottom of the production, and they're giving you a lot of disagreeable suggestions lyrically in the music. And then you wonder why we see all of the intergroup violence that I mentioned earlier among us as a people. This is coming from the rap music. We got Henry Cedillo is giving an applaud to Heavy D. Yeah, salute to Heavy D, man. I was listening the other day to Heavy D Blue Funk. That was my favorite Heavy D album, with production by Tony Dofat. Pete Rock did a few tracks on that album. Best Heavy D album in my opinion. I don't think Heavy D ever did a bad album, but I think he outdid himself on Blue Funk. So when this is done, and you going about your day, at some point try to put on Heavy D Blue Funk. Good album. So another aspect of African culture, well, gratitude. We want to be hyper focused on gratitude. And some people say, the experts who are in the field of mental health, they say you should get a gratitude journal and just write down every day things that you're grateful for. And it's a drill. If you have a family, you have children, you have elders, just stop them at some point in the day and ask them, hey, mention 3 things that you're grateful for. What that does now is that puts your brain in a gear where you have to think positive to come up with 3 things that you're grateful for. And it doesn't have to be something significant. It could be, hey, I'm grateful for baseball caps, or I'm grateful for, being able to go to the mall, whatever the case might be. It doesn't have to be something significant, but do that as a drill with your family and children, elders, and so forth. Just ask them to stop in a day and think of 3 things that they're grateful for. And you would be practicing African culture, because that's now putting your brain in an agreeable mode where you have to think of things that are positive and agreeable that you're grateful for. And again, it doesn't have to be something major and significant. You could be grateful for a windbreaker when it's raining outside. It doesn't have to be something major. Either way, another good aspect of African culture, this is one of my favorite that I like, teaching morality through storytelling and proverbs. Um, Mythology, there's a science behind mythology because there's always a moral to the story. And if you understand the story as a myth and you're getting whatever it is you need to get from the story, the myth serves its point. It serves its function. So I could tell you to be kind to people, or I could tell you a whole story, and at the end of the story, the moral of the story is be kind to people. You'll remember it more if it's in a story versus me just saying that. So there's a science behind storytelling. Um, the European talk a lot about Greek mythology. The Greeks learned mythology from ancient Kemet. So the great Dr. Ben, the great Dr. John Henry Clark, they always said that what we refer to as Greek mythology is actually African mythology, but they just calling it Greek mythology. So storytelling is a very powerful aspect of African culture. Proverbs, like the proverb that says when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. That's an African proverb. So if you're a parent, you want to be mindful of not arguing and fighting and et cetera in front of the children, because the people that suffer the most in that equation is the children. Let me see. Henry Cedillo said, absolutely. I still listen to new generation underground lyricists. Yes, you got to listen to the new stuff, not being played on commercial radio. Doesn't mean rap is dead. For the person who said rap, the sixth drip has said rap has been dead. I guess he's trying to say rap has been dead for a long time. Commercial rap is dead. I'm not attacking the sixth drip. I'm just saying if you're listening to underground music and you know where to get it, you know what outlets online to go to listen to your underground rap. Plenty of great boom bap rap. Still got cuts and scratches on it. Still the kind of rap that we kind of grew up and we can relate to. It says everything you just said describes KRS to a T. Not sure what that means. The sixth strip. Explain what you mean when you say that. That I'm describing KRS-One to the T, because KRS is somebody that I'm having any number of issues with, and I've had issues with him for years. So please clarify what you mean when you say that, so we can expound on that. KRS-One as a whole, another conversation. So, important aspect of African culture: teaching morality through storytelling and proverbs. There's a science behind stories. In fact, in Africa, the griots were the people that told stories. So they're sometimes in some cultures referred to as the jele. They were the storytellers. And storytelling is not something that you just found in ancient Kemet. It predates ancient Kemet. Storytelling is something that was going on throughout all different aspects of African culture. And it teaches morality. If you tell people you're not a Christian, some people will say, well, where do you get your morals from? As if Christianity is the only thing you can get morals and ethics from. You can get tons of morals and ethics from studying your culture. Again, we have to go back to our culture as African people. Philosophical values and character development. So one of the many philosophical values that comes out of African culture is the concept of ma'at. Oh, okay. So the sixth strip says history, knowledge, and teaching. Okay, okay. So I get it now. I get it. Salute, salute to the sixth strip. Thank you for that. I would like to think that I'm teaching something. Pardon me, that people are getting something of some value from. So philosophical values. The concept of ma'at, philosophical value that comes out of ancient Kemet. Ma'at is one of these things that is not necessarily easy to explain. You can't just say ma'at is X, Y, and Z, and that's it. Because if you do, then that's probably not the totality of what ma'at is. This is just an example of a philosophical value that comes out of African culture. And I'm reading, it says, ma'at is the ancient African Kemet term for the valued principles of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, balanced relationships, respect, and righteousness. To be in harmony with each other, we must convey gratitude for each other. There's that gratitude that I talked about again. In our thoughts, speech, and action. The concept of ma'at represents positive aspects of human behavior. Ma'at, in part, again, it takes more than a simplistic explanation to explain this idea. Ma'at, in part, is the idea of building and developing relationships and human character. Again, building human character, morality, ethics, right? And you see a lot of the sororities, the fraternities, the Freemasons. What do they say? They say their goal and what they're teaching is an attempt to build character, right? It's character building. This idea of character building is something that comes out of African culture, predates the sororities, the fraternities, predates Freemasonry, predates Europe. The idea of character building comes out of African culture, and that comes from the the storytelling, comes from the proverbs. All these things are being done to teach character. To practice justice is to practice the principle of ma'at. Ma'at is balance. So we talk about yin and yang, which comes out of Chinese culture. That's the concept of duality, meaning these polar opposites rely on each other to exist. So, for example, day and night complement each other. If it was daytime all the time and there was no such thing as night, there'd be nothing to compare daytime to. So day wouldn't exist as day, it would just be. It's kind of hard to explain what that means. But that concept of duality, or that yin and yang that we refer, or we kind of give the credit to the Chinese for this philosophical concept of yin and yang, that idea comes out of ancient African culture. And the idea of ma'at exemplifies this idea of balance. To practice justice is to practice the principle of ma'at. We see in America the image of justice holding the scale, right? And this concept of a scale in ancient Kemet, they said your heart will be weighed against a feather to see if your heart was light or if you had a heavy heart in your life. Again, it's teaching morality through storytelling in proverbs and so forth. So in a society, justice comes when everyone is respected. We talked about a deep respect for elders, which comes out of African culture. We talked about a respect for ancestors. We talked about a respect and the well-being of children. In order to be in agreeable relationships, there has to be a mutual respect, right? It says to practice justice is to practice the principle of Ma'at. In a society, justice comes when everyone is respected and works collectively based on the ideas of truth, justice, harmony, balance, respect, reciprocity, and order. Our goal should be to restore peace, harmony, and reciprocity to the race. That's one of the philosophical values that comes out of African culture. Another one that I like a lot is the idea of Ubuntu. Ubuntu comes out of the Southern African, I think it's the Zulu concept. Ubuntu is kind of loosely defined in English to mean I am because we are, or I am you. Now, everything that you can call yourself is a relationship to another people or another person. So you can say, I'm a father, I'm a brother, I'm an uncle, I'm a doctor, I'm a plumber, I'm a whatever. Everything you can call yourself is a relationship to other people. So in African philosophical thought, you come into existence because of your relationship with other people. This is the sort of thing that we don't talk about. You know, not we per se, but there's a lot of people that talk about Africa and African culture as if it's something primitive and savage, not understanding that European culture and the Western world culture is based on African culture. So philosophical values like Ma'at, Ubuntu, this Botho that comes out of Botswana, there's any number of other ones. I'm kind of winging this off the top of my head. I can't think of them all. But philosophical values that facilitate character building. These are things that come out of African culture that we need to get back to. These are things that the music is not promoting. Commercial rap music. And that's very deliberate because commercial rap music is put on the radio by people that don't look like us, the people that make the music. And a lot of the people that own the black music stations are not black. The FCC that allows this to go across the airwaves, white owned and operated agency. I can go on and on about music. Either way, and other important aspects of African culture include music, dance, and visual art. Our music never promoted harming, brutalizing, and killing each other the way it does now in commercial rap. And that music is being consumed by younger people. When I say younger, I mean teenagers and younger. I've seen children that probably not even 10 years old yet listening to this negative rap. What is that doing to them psychologically, right? And so music and dance has always been an important part of African culture. I say music is not entertainment, music is psychology. And that's a whole nother explanation I can get into about the science of music and how it makes you feel. It can make you feel good, can make you feel angry, can make you feel happy, can make you want to dance, right? Music is something that has a profound psychological impact. And dance is the same thing. Music and dance, important aspects of African culture, agreeable music and dance, and visual art. So our music was hip hop or rap music, right? Our dance was breaking. And our visual art has always been graffiti, right? So these are aspects of African culture that we see go over into hip hop culture. I would like to get more into that. I'm running out of time. I'm going to see how much more I can do. Okay, so another aspect of African culture that African people do not get credit for is science, medicine, and diet. Dr. Milton Mills, a Black emergency room physician, he said most people, most Black people in America are of West African ancestry. If you study the typical West African pre-colonial diet, traditional West African diet did not include a lot of meat eating and the consumption of animal flesh. It included a lot of leafy greens, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, etc. Did not include the consumption of animals. He said if they did consume animals, it was small portions and it was once in a long while. That was not how we ate. So diet is something we can learn out of African culture. Science, we talk a lot about, any number of scientists. In the European Senate orientation we get, they love to talk about Einstein. Albert Einstein. Oh, this man was so brilliant. They never tell you about Imhotep. Imhotep is what the Greeks call Asclepius, and they say he was the father of medicine. And then years later, Hippocrates, who learned 2,000 years after Imhotep, came and went. 2,000 years after the birth of Imhotep, the Greeks and Europeans had the nerve to call Hippocrates the father of medicine. Imhotep is the father of medicine. And was it Herodotus? I'm blanking on my Greek here, but either way, they said in their writings that they learned from these people in Africa. They said these people had brown skin and woolly hair. This is before systemic racism comes in. Herodotus and all these other people, Hermes, whomever, that learned from African people, they said it early on, right? That they learned all of this information from African people. It's the science, right? The science of medicine, so forth. All of that's African. Another aspect of African culture is knowing your history. That's important because when we were coming up on rap, late 80s, early 90s, we had Public Enemy, we had X-Clan, we had Poor Righteous Teachers, we had Brand Nubian, we had any number of people that were trying to teach us our history and give us that historical perspective. They were putting it in rap. Walt Cart, I hope I'm saying that right, says, indeed. So salute to you for chiming in on the chat. Henry Cedillo said, yes, music can be very powerful. Absolutely, Henry Cedillo. Music can be very powerful and can influence you in a negative way or positive way. That's actual facts. It says energetic and can be used as musical medicine. Wow, I'm gonna start using that, Henry Cedillo. You coined the term musical medicine. I'm gonna start using that if you don't mind. He said it can facilitate mental healing or the complete opposite. Whoo, that's true indeed. That's actual facts. That's actual fact. Musical medicine. I like that. I like that, Henry Cedillo. I'm going to use that. So thank you for chiming in and saying that. But yeah, music's definitely an important part. Science and medicine, definitely an important part. Knowing your history is definitely important. And love for your culture should be part of the culture. This is what we were getting in rap music early on. We were being taught love for ourselves and love for our culture. Unfortunately, we're not getting that love for the culture anymore. Now, I said in my book, The Fact Book, that we need to be re-educated to understand that there is dignity in being African. Many of us seem to have lost that sense of dignity, and we no longer understand that there's a dignity in being African. There's any number of people now that want to say that they're not African. Somehow they're ADOS and FBA and all of these fictional designations that fake experts on the internet made up. So dignity, what is dignity, right? This is something we need to get back to in our culture. What is dignity? Dignity is a sense of esteem in oneself, as well as self-respect. The music now does not promote good esteem because you see a lot of female rappers, they're getting their bodies done, as they say. That doesn't promote good self-esteem among girls that don't look that way, right? So dignity is a sense of esteem in oneself as well as self-respect. For people of African heritage, dignity comes from understanding our history and embracing our African identity. This is something I wrote not too long ago. So I'm going to read that again. For people of African heritage, dignity comes from understanding our history and embracing our African identity, ancestry, and culture. This is what we're doing today, trying to give you these different aspects of African culture so that you can have dignity in yourself as an African, and you can go forward practicing that culture. We must be re-educated to understand that there is dignity in being African. I just said that. In a society that is very anti-African and very anti-Black, we need to be re-educated to understand that there's dignity in being African. And again, society and Western world culture was influenced by African culture. This is what the system doesn't want you to know. It doesn't want you to understand. As people of African heritage, dignity should be at the core of our culture. I'm going to say that again. I think that's important. As people of African heritage, dignity should be at the core of our culture. When we listen to Public Enemy, X Clan, Poor Righteous Teachers, Lakim Shabazz, King's Son, et cetera, Jungle Brothers, dignity was at the core of that music. This is what they were trying to get across to us. So we have to understand that dignity is part of the culture, and we have to get back to this sense of dignity in ourselves and our culture. And that will give you a sense of esteem, which is how it started. You have lost your dignity when you practice and imitate another people's culture. I don't even have to go far and explain that. A lot of us, and I'm not attacking anybody, because we're all on different tiers on the ladder. But a lot of us are still praying and worshiping entities that don't look like us, that look like Europeans. Again, this is not an attack against anybody. I'm trying to teach a lesson here. But as people of African heritage, dignity should be at the core of our culture. And says you have lost your dignity when you practice another people's culture. Without dignity, we can never be self-sufficient or bring about Black life. That's key. Without dignity, we can never be self-sufficient or bring about Black life. Okay, so Black life, I have to explain that. Life is Life. Liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment. Shout out to Brother Shamari in Philly. We cannot bring about Black liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment if we don't have dignity in ourselves. And without dignity, we can never be self-sufficient or bring about Black life. It says rap music, I guess, has misled a lot. It says the thug and gangster image. I think it says the doom. The doom. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Thank you for chiming in on the chat. But dignity is very important to our culture, and this is what we need to get back to. This is where commercial rap deliberately falls short. It's not giving us dignity. It's not giving us, this sense of esteem that we need to be a success. And this is all systemic. The system knows that this music is not promoting positive relationships. It's not going to culminate into anything that's beneficial for us. And it's definitely not going to bring about Black life, Black liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment, because the music does not teach liberation, independence, freedom, or empowerment. Where when we had our conscious rap era from 1987 to about 1992, we were taught liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment. Now it's not teaching that. And so I think it's a reason why the music now is so negative, and they continue to promote this negative music among us. It's very deliberate. So we need to be grounded in African culture. So everything that I just mentioned, whether it's group solidarity, group loyalty, relationships, mutual respect, social cohesion, respect for elders, respect for ancestors, emphasis on family, focus on the well-being of children, respect for nature, gratitude, more teaching morality, philosophical values, those things, music, dance, etc., those things ground us in African culture. So if we want to practice African culture, we need to get back to those things. I'm putting this out in a book that I'm working on, my next book, forthcoming book. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be the next one, but forthcoming book, I'm gonna explain all of this. Now, values should come from your culture. If we understand African culture, we understand the values that come out of the culture. Now, among Black people in America, there's been two movements only. You had the integration movement and the independence movement. The integration movement said that freedom for us as Black people meant integrating with our oppressor. So these were people like the Urban League, the NAACP, the Civil Rights Movement. They thought that freedom for us meant integrating with those people that were oppressing us. Now, I disagree with that, but that was one movement. On the other hand, you had the independence movement. These were people like Martin Delany, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X. They said in order for us to be free, we have to bring about an independent reality from ourselves, independent from the status quo, independent from our oppressor. We need to bring about this concept of Black life, Black liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment. if you're black in America, or if you're black anywhere in the world, but in America, if you're black, you're focused on one of two things. You either focus on integrating and getting a more comfortable seat in the system, or you're going to be focused on black life, black liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment. And the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said, if you're not doing your part to fight the system of structural racism, you're basically just trying to get a more comfortable seat in that system. And getting a more comfortable seat is integration and assimilation. And so it's divided in between those two lines. You're either an integrationist, assimilationist, or you're a Pan-Africanist and a black nationalist. There's no in between. And one of my elders, Dr. Uhuru Hotep, he said that. He said, you're either an integrationist, assimilationist, or you're a Pan-African black nationalist. The only ideologies among us that are promoting black liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment are the ideas of black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. Now, you don't have to embrace those per se, but as long as you're trying to bring about black liberation, independence, freedom, and empowerment, and be in solidarity with your group, meaning your race, you're not into this integration thing. And so as people of African heritage, we need solutions and we need strategies. Now, in the beginning, I asked, what is the greatest problem we're faced with as a group? The greatest problem we're faced with as a group is the system of structural racism, which is based on the myth of white supremacy. That's the greatest problem we're faced with. That problem is the reason why we see the mass incarceration of black men, who are 6% of the U.S. population. There's no way 6% of the U.S. population can commit more crimes than the other 94%. But we're the most mass incarcerated people in the country anyway. That's because of structural racism. We are always a subject of these racially bigoted police killings, and the police get away with it every time. That's structural racism. Police had a policy called stop and frisk, which never really stopped. I mention that sometimes people snicker and laugh at me and say that's a thing of the past. It may be, but I don't know that stop and frisk totally stopped. So that's systemic, right? Because that's structural. That's how they're being trained to go out and engage people. Gentrification is part of structural racism. Redlining, which deliberately keeps wealth out of the black community, is part of structural racism. The way children are miseducated in the public school, a part of the system. And so we need solutions and strategies to combat that system. One of the solutions is for us to get back to our culture as African people and live in what the great Dr. John Henry Clark called our human beingness. We need to be able to put our guard down and just function in our human beingness. In order for us to do that, we would have to eliminate the system of structural racism, which is what the great Dr. Francis Cress Welsing talked about, eliminating the system and replacing that system with a system based on justice. There's more I could say because I am not totally done, but my time is up. I do want to, Henry Cedillo said, great live episode. Like always a pleasure to start off the Unpopular Monday with you, spreading knowledge and having information or loving information with us. The education, everyone, enjoy your week. Oh, salute Henry Cedillo. Enjoy your week, brother. And yeah, my hope is that I do make Monday a little bit better for the people that start their week on a Monday. But big up to Henry Cedillo. Big up to TH Doom that was in the chat. Hopefully I'm not butchering the names. Shout out to Walt Cart, the Sixth Drip. I think I might have got Hassan Burton. Gotta shout out Hassan Burton. That's F.A.C.T family since day one. I think that Kenny Mack chimed in. There's any number of people. Hopefully I mentioned everybody that chimed in on the chat. Shout out to DJ Tiger. Shout out to Bot Ricks. And always remember to continue to check out the programming here on the DJ Tiger channel. We're planning something real special for next Monday at 10 a.m. Tiger's going to put out the flyer on that soon. So definitely check us out next Monday at 10 a.m. And DJ Tiger should be on with me next Monday. So I would say to everybody that chimed in, everybody that saw this live, everybody that's watching the pre-recorded version, stay safe and stay Pan-African. Peace.